Welcome, everyone, to the Vertical Church Podcast. This is episode 9, and we're going to be going over the sermon, Why I Got Rid of My Ugly Pet.
Yeah, we are.
And this is in the series Decisive Battles. So, Phil, if you could just set the scene of the Battle of the Alamo for us.
Yeah, so obviously I love history, and this has been, I was telling Austin this week, this has been my chance to geek out as a pastor and just study history to get ready for sermons, and I have loved it. And so the Alamo took place back in the 1800s. Texas isn't even a state yet, and that's what they're fighting for. They want to be their own state, independent from Mexico. And what happens is these guys from Tennessee, some frontiersmen, come down to help the Texans because Tennessee always looking to fire a fight, apparently, because they're just bored, I guess. I don't know. So they show up. Davy Crockett's with them, and they've got doctors, farmers from Texas. I mean, they just got this ragtag group of people who have come together and yeah, Texas should have independence. Is there one thing they rally around? And they end up at the Alamo, which is an old Spanish mission. It's not designed for a last stand, And so they're there and they get surrounded. There's roughly 182 of them, give or take, fighting men in there, and they get surrounded by 1,000 Spanish soldiers. So I mean, the odds are well over 5-1 right now, and you never want that.
Right.
And so they're in the Alamo, and Santa Anna sends wave after wave of attack against them, and they repel them each time. And so after 2 weeks, Santa Anna, who was a very respected general at the time, had just had enough. He's just had enough with these doggone Texans and Davy Crockett and them all up in the Alamo. And he sends everyone, every last man he's got, he sends at the Alamo before dawn on March 6th, and they overwhelm the Alamo. I mean, they couldn't keep up at that point, and they weren't quite even ready. And so they win the battle in about 90 minutes. They defeat all the Texans in there. There was no one left alive, minus some women, children, and a couple other people they let out. And so this whole time, though, the Alamo had been having hope in a guy named Sam Houston. That Sam Houston, the leader of all the Texas forces, was going to come to their aid and save them as they made this stand. And Sam Houston never came, because he was using the Alamo to buy time to rally all the troops around Texas to get ready to fight that massive force that Santa Anna had. And he knew, if I take what I've got right now and go to the Alamo, not only are the people of the Alamo going to make it, we're not going to make it. We're not ready. And so the Alamo's defeated, and Santa Anna marches on, and Sam Houston keeps running from Santa Anna over and over and over for weeks. And then finally, Sam Houston goes, I'm ready. And Santa Anna's kind of gotten casual. The Mexican forces are overconfident at this point, and they're just chilling out in a field, having a good time. And then that morning, or that day, Sam Houston and men burst forth from a trees in an ambush surprise attack. And the rally cry you can hear from all of them is, remember the Alamo. And it's this moment that everything those men believed in the Alamo becomes encapsulated in this rally cry. I'm literally going to die because I believe in independence that much. And they did. Every last one of those guys laid down their life to have independence. And that became this rally cry as they rush through. They defeat the Mexican forces in just mere minutes, and they win independence. And so, yes, every man in that Alamo didn't see independence, but everything they believed in ended up happening.
Dang.
But it came with a cost.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man. That's such an incredible story. And we still talk about that today, 200-something years later. It's just wild, that valor that they showed there. But yeah, fighting for the independence, it does come with a cost. And from there you go into the next point about talking, if Jesus says, if anyone wants to follow me, pick up your cross and come alongside me, and talking about the cost there associated with following Jesus. Can you just go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I love that verse is Jesus says, if anyone. If anyone wants to follow me, he doesn't throw out, except you, Philip, because of all the sins you've committed and all the mistakes you've made, or Desi, you can't follow me because you're not old enough, or you're not the right gender, or you've not made enough money, or you've made too many mistakes, whatever it is, that we try to fill in why Jesus wouldn't on us. The verse is actually pretty clear. It says, if anyone, any person out there wants to follow me, they can. But so many times you and I add the but in front of anyone, that we're not even good enough to be included. And then Jesus says, no. Every last one of you and all of your mistakes can come follow me. But there's a standard, and it's to deny yourself. It's to pick up your cross, follow me, and lose your life to find it in me. And so those verses I love, one, because the invitation is any of us. Any of us, in all of our horrible mistakes and sins and flaws, we can follow Jesus. But there's a cost. And it's to deny ourselves, give up our life to find it in Jesus. And that's a massive cost. But then it's so interesting to me that he says, pick up your cross, because obviously we know what ends up happening in Jesus' life. Like, Jesus dies on a cross.
Yeah.
So he's invoking powerful imagery that there is a heavy cost to following Jesus. Like, it's not, hey, come follow Jesus and your life just kind of gets better, kind of elevates. You get a better tier of the American dream if you follow Jesus. Jesus says, no, you'll get a better kingdom eternally to be part of, but it's going to cost you heavily in this life.
Yeah.
And he doesn't sugarcoat it. And so for us, we have to look each other in the eye and go, do I believe enough to give up what Jesus is asking of me?
Yeah. Yeah, and my question is, like, what is our definition of better? Like, if I think a better life is actually the American dream, then Jesus says, you're sadly mistaken, Like, he has so much more life to offer us in that cutting away of our carnal desires, And it's so interesting, too, that, juxtaposition of, basically crucifying yourself in order to have more life. Whereas, if you choose the American dream, so to speak, of this worldly life, then, that's actually the thing that's going to be hurting us and, taking our life away.
Yeah, so later in those verses, even Jesus even says that basically thing. It's powerful that thousands of years later, what he said echoes so true deeply to the American dream. He says, what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? And I'm like, if that's not speaking to what American culture pushes us to, of hey, you can gain the whole world. It's before you. It's there for the taking, and you should take it. And Jesus says, what will it profit you if you actually do get everything? Like, what will it profit you if you get everything this world has to offer, but you lose your soul in the process? And so as Christians, he says, by the way, it won't. Deny yourself, lose your life, and you'll find it in me. And those verses they're tough. They're not super exciting to talk about because we're like, dang, I got to deny myself. But he said it, and you and I have to decide if we want to follow him.
Yeah. We have to open up that space for him to come in. Like, if we have it, I picture it like a house full of all these things, whatever it is our focus is on. And it's like, if you have too much clutter in there, then some stuff has to come out before we can have that intimacy with Jesus where he's living in us and we're becoming more of like him. But from there you go into this point about, can we honestly say Jesus is worth it all? That's something that we need to think about actually. Sometimes we talk about writing down, what are the 3 points where, it's costed me something or something to this nature. I think this would be a good point to write down, what is my price to walk away from Jesus? Is there a thing? And, I know for me there is, if I think about it long enough, there's probably something in me that's man, I still need to work on this because there's a temptation there that Satan might have a foothold. And telling me, I may have an agreement to a lie that this is something that I would put in front of my relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, so if we're honest, some of us come to Jesus because we need something. And some of us it isn't because we feel like we need salvation from our sin. It's we need this job title, or we need this bank account number, or we need this relationship status, or whatever it is. We come to Jesus and we're like, I need this. The thing is that once you get it, are you willing to stop denying yourself for Jesus? I just picture all of us, we're carrying our cross, we're denying ourselves for Jesus, and then, the person 3, spots over from you carrying their cross, they're like, oh, sweet, my retirement fund just hit this amount, so I'm actually going to drop my cross and now live for myself. Or, the person 2 spots over from you, they've been wanting a boyfriend so badly, and they finally get a boyfriend, and they go, I'm going to drop my cross and live for myself now. Or you and I go, man, I've succeeded in getting this job title, so now I'm going to drop my cross and no longer deny myself for Jesus. What is it about the cost that is going to define whether you're willing to pay it to leave Jesus? So the question that I asked, and you're asking, and if you're the listener, what's your price? Like, do you have a price where you're willing to drop that cross and stop denying yourself for Jesus and to walk away and live for yourself? Do you have a price? And it's kind of an offensive question if you follow Jesus for a while. You're like, how dare you? But generally ask,
Yeah.
What are you trying to hide from Holy Spirit at this point? And if you do have a price, repent, turn it away. Like, Jesus, I'm so sorry. Like, I don't want that. I don't want there to be any price this world can offer me that'll make me drop this cross at this point.
Yeah. Gosh, and from there, it's such a beautiful transition into 1 Corinthians chapter 6. It's like verse 20, where it talks about like Jesus bought us with a price, and for him, this is such a good quote. Every time you say this, or we've talked about this, it just hits me. But when our life came up on the auction block, and they asked Jesus, like, what are you willing to pay for Philip Kite or for Desi Garrison? And Jesus goes, everything, like without a question. And that came here to pay everything for you and I.
Yeah, that's a sobering part. Like, I'm honestly getting a little emotional thinking about it, because like if you think of the auction room of what's going on, and the item that comes up for bid is the soul of the Desi Garrison, or the soul of Philip Kiter. Your soul as the listener came up on the auction block, and you think about it, usually they kind of start at a lower price and they kind of build up. The auction block, there's no one else in the room. Like, there's no one else that can bid on your life, my life, your life as the listener. There's no one else. It's Jesus in the room. There's no competition for bidding. And if we're honest with ourselves, you and I go, I don't even have a price. It's literally worthless. I've messed up too much. Like, the price is zero. Like, Jesus is just going to have his popcorn and a soda and bid nothing. And he'd be right to do so. And instead, our life comes up on the auction block. No one else in the room. No one else bidding. It's not even a bidding war. And Jesus goes, I'll give my life for that person. What? Like, the auctioneer at that point has got to just, like, fall backwards, because it's so unheard of. And he doesn't do that for just one human. He did it for every last one of us. It's almost like he meant it when he said, anyone can come follow me. And it blows my mind. And yet, if we're honest as humans, because of our flesh, even after Jesus does that for us, you and I still sometimes have a price to drop our cross. What? I don't know. It just blows my mind thinking about that moment where Jesus says, Phil Kite's literally worth nothing, but I'll pay everything for him.
Man, it makes me think of Hosea, and like the auctioneer looks at Jesus in that moment and he goes, he was already yours. What do you mean you're going to pay a price for him? Like when Hosea is chasing Gomer, and like they're married, and God tells him to go and pay the price for her again. And man, it's so beautiful. Like, Jesus chooses us even though we were his to begin with, and he didn't have to pay a price at all, but he chose to anyway. Man, just to everyone listening, like, if you have not read the book of Hosea, it's the most beautiful story of like the pursuit from God to his bride. And it just translates so well to the way that the Lord pursues us on a daily basis.
Love the shout out to the Old Testament. I love it. Let's go.
Yeah. So another great thing, and this transitioning from the Old Testament into the New Testament, Paul is writing to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, and they're having like this heated debate. They're talking back and forth, and Paul is basically like getting on to them about their sin and things like this, but then he like graciously, and just like the Lord speaks to the Corinthians, and he goes, I will gladly spend myself and all I have for you, even though it seems like the more I love you, the less you love me. And like Jesus, I just want to encourage you guys, like Jesus is not surprised at us running from him. It's been happening since Genesis. Like, follow the Israelites through the wilderness. They're running from him. Follow everyone from that point on into now, And the thing is, in this upside down kingdom, he's using the most unlikely candidate so that he can further glorify himself. And so that everyone around that person will say, there must be a God because this person has been used for the kingdom. You know what I mean?
100%. I mean, that's why I'm here, you know?
Right.
Is, my testimony is like, I was ready to kill myself in high school. And I always think about it, God should have gone, do it. Like, I was so sinful, so prideful, so self-centered. And instead he shows up and still loves me and draws me back to him. It makes no sense to me, you know, but that's his character, not my character, which reveals I'm terrible at being the Lord of my life. But Jesus is very good at it.
Right.
So
it's almost like he knows what he's doing.
he does. He's very qualified. Strong resume.
Dang it. Yeah, so on a lighter note, tell me about my boy Sparky, my pet Sparky.
So the idea came up in the sermon of ugly pets. And, you know, if you've gone over to someone's house and they've invited you in, it's your first time over, maybe they're newer friends or whatever, and you're kind of excited. You come in, oh, what a beautiful house, this or that. And then you hear this, you know, like scurrying coming around. And you're like, oh, dear Father, what's about to happen?
Right.
And turns the corners is their dog. And as soon as you make eye contact, you want to hurl. It's the most butt ugly thing you've ever seen in your life. And you're like, and they're like, oh, it's Sparky, you know, and you know, like, oh, and you're like trying to look at the ceiling. You're trying to look away because you don't want to look at Sparky. Sparky does not invoke anyone wanting to look at him. And they don't know it anymore. They don't understand that Sparky is butt ugly, you know, but you do. You immediately walk in and you know. And I always wonder, those people, did you at least know when you adopted Sparky that he was ugly? Like, he was truly ugly. But eventually you live with Sparky long enough and you build a relationship and he's always there and he's your pet. They love him. They love him. And what I was using with this example is that's how we treat our sin so often, is it's this butt ugly pet that eventually, if we let stick around long enough, we just kind of become complacent toward. It's just part of us. You know, when we get stressed out, we go do this, or when we get mad, we respond in this way. It's just kind of who we are when we're falling apart a little bit. Mm-hmm. But the Bible says that should never happen. Like, don't keep ugly pets around. Give them a eviction notice. Like, don't tolerate ugly sin in your life. And so, yeah, Sparky's got to go.
Sparky's got to go. Yeah. For me, that ugly pet, sorry to the listener, if you have a naked cat, like a hairless cat, that's the first thing I thought of. So
as you should. Those are butt ugly.
Right. So, yeah, and this makes me think, you know, think about that gradual, like, crescendo of the sin, just beginning as, like, the small, inconspicuous thing, but then over time, like, if it has knocked us off the trajectory of, like, righteousness in, like, just 1 degree at the beginning, miles down the road, you're going to be far away from the destination that it was to begin with. And so I was living in this house once, and they had done some plumbing work and had forgotten to, like, tape over the hole in the bathroom that led to the septic tank. And you know, a few weeks go by, I never knew. It was in a different room in the house, and my dad comes to visit, and he's like, as soon as he walks in, he was like, you got a sewage leak in here. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, no, we don't. I don't smell anything. And he goes, I know you don't, because it happened gradually over time. And so you can't smell it, but I can. And so it's just like that with our sin. Like, we need friends that are going to tell us when our pets are ugly. Mm-hmm. You know, we need friends that are going to come in and smell and say, dude, you got a leak in, you know, the septic gas or whatever. And we need friends and community around us that are going to be like, man, what's going on, like, in this area in your life? Like, and that speaks to our intentionality with our friends too. Like, we need to be on a level with at least one person where they know everything about us, and we need to be vulnerable, and we need to tell them our sin and the things that we're struggling with so that they can point out our ugly pets. You know? Yeah.
So if you're listening, you're kind of wrestling with that idea, go read 1 John 1, go read James chapter 5, and then it kind of talks about some of those things if you want to dive into that later. Because it's what Desi, you just said, is 100% biblically true.
Thank you.
Shout out.
For the reference. Yeah, so moving on, you talk about the price for the men in the Alamo was everything. And they were fighting for their independence, and you kind of commissioned us to fight with everything for our independence from sin at that point.
Yeah, I think if we're honest, some of us have been fighting. Like, and we fight, sometimes if you live long enough, you feel like you're fighting some of the same stuff over and over. And if you feel like you're losing enough, you get discouraged and you start to just accept that ugly pet. You just go, man, I've tried. But Jesus would say, until your last breath, fight against that. Fight to have integrity, to do what's right before the Lord. Like, fight to crucify your flesh. Fight to submit yourself to Holy Spirit. Never, ever give up in your fight, And so for me, I wanted to encourage all of us, like, don't ever give up. Like, don't ever give in. Don't ever accept sin as part of your identity. Because as a Christian, our identity should be Jesus alone. No additions, no subtractions. It should be Jesus alone.
Yeah, for me, one of the like tangible things that I do in order to like break that down is there are lies that Satan tries to tell me all the time that I have to break down and like disagree with. Because
almost check the source, if you will.
Absolutely. Shameless plug. But yeah, like I think we all have those that we've agreed to, like, I'm never going to be a good dad, or I'm, never going to find the right person, things like this. And they're different with everyone, but just praying through those and like reconsecrating our identity to Christ on a daily basis is a tangible thing that we can do. And just like sitting in that and being like, Jesus, what is this? Talk to me about this. What is going on here? And reconsecrating that to him is such a helpful tool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I wanted to plug this podcast from Craig Groeschel. He's a pastor at Life Church, but the title of it is When It's Time to Throw a Punch. And I think that, a lot of times we just think that Jesus was a pushover, because in like the culture that we're in and in Christianity, sometimes like it's just this happy-go-lucky, like it's all grace and like no fight. But it's just not that. And honestly, like I think C.S. Lewis would back me up on this in the Screw Tape Letters, is that's exactly what Satan wants us to think.
Yes.
Is that it's not a battle, because it is a freaking war.
Yes.
Like every day, like it's a battle. And I just wanted to plug this to you guys because Craig Groeschel does such a great job of navigating when it is time to throw a punch. Like Jesus was not afraid to flip a table over, The man was brutal at some points with people. Like he was telling it how it was. So that's such a good resource for you guys too.
Yeah, Pastor Craig is phenomenal.
So next, we talked about it's better to live with nothing and know Jesus than to have everything without him.
Yeah, when we say no, it's K-N-O-W.
Yeah.
That's just to clarify for the listener if you're just joining us. And so Jesus is talking in Matthew 5, and he says things like, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. It's better to enter the kingdom maimed than to take your whole body into hell. He says things like, if your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It's better to enter the kingdom maimed than to enter hell with everything. And it's this radical idea. And he's not talking about literally going physically maiming yourself. I think he's saying what needs to be removed in your life. What is holding you back? What's causing you to stumble? Literally remove it. And I think so many times a lot of us don't like our sin, but we also don't dislike it enough to do anything about it. Like are we really disliking and hating and our sin enough to go, I'll take my eye out, so to say. Like I'll cut off my arm, so to say. Like whatever's causing me in my life to do that, I'll cut it out. Because I'd rather enter the kingdom than take everything I have from this world into hell. And those are one of those things where, we think Jesus is super nice, but how many of us love what he's saying there? I mean, that pierces to our soul because it puts the onus on us. Yeah. The onus isn't on Jesus. Now, he's died on the cross. He said, anyone wants to follow me. But by the way, now you got to deny yourself. Now you got to do things like cut out the things in your life that cause you to sin. And we go, oh, that's really uncomfortable. That's makes me have to change the way I live my life. And Jesus like, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I hope I wasn't unclear.
Right.
And that's hard, and because then it comes down to genuinely, do you and I want to deny ourselves? Do we want to pick up our cross? Do we want to lose our life? So yeah, those are potent words from him that make every last one of us look in the mirror and hopefully do something about our life.
Yeah. And there's like a cutting there that has to happen. I think, you know, Jesus probably wasn't being serious, or being literal about gouging your eye out. But I think the severity of that imagery,
yes,
he was being very
100%.
serious about. And the pain, that is associated with getting rid of sin is hard, and like cutting that away. There's some pain associated with that.
I would say so.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah, so at the end of the service, we talked about, or we went into like a service of communion and remembering Jesus. Can you break that down for us a little bit?
For sure. So at the very end of Jesus' life, he takes his disciples, those closest with him, into a room, and they're having a meal together, and he takes bread, and he says, "This is my body that's about to be broken," because he knows he's going to be crucified. Like, his body is going to be beaten, tortured, and he says, "This is my body. Eat of this in remembrance of me." And then he takes the wine, and he says, "This is my blood that's going to be poured out," because obviously, when he's going through the torture, he's going to bleed. And he says, "This is my blood that's been poured out. Drink of this in remembrance of me." He's trying to say, do not forget the price I'm about to pay for you. And so I think it is easy, if we've especially been a Christian a while, we go to church enough, we don't really talk about Jesus being absolutely brutally taken out and paying that price for us. When we're up on that auction block, it wasn't a small price when he says everything. He literally had his body broken and bled for it and died. And so he says, do not forget. And so when you and I get up every day, not only are we willing to deny ourselves, but are we willing to go, Jesus, I remember the price you paid for me to have freedom and to know you. Because if we don't remember, does it really affect our life anymore?
Yeah.
It should.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, circling back to the Alamo reference, the people in Texas are still living in the effect and the wake of the Battle of the Alamo, and the independence of that part of the country is resting in the light of that battle.
Absolutely.
And by remembering Jesus, we can live the rest of our life and in the light of who he was and the freedom that we've experienced in him. But I looked up the Alamo, and I just wanted to read into it a little bit before we met today. And it said that 2.5 million people visit the Alamo yearly. And I was just thinking about, man, if we laid our life down for Jesus and gave it all, there's a legacy that's going to be left after we're gone. And it's not going to be for us, but it's going to be for people who looked at our life and said, man, Jesus actually might have been worth something.
Yeah.
And that's honestly the goal. It's if that's not our goal, is to lift Jesus up at the end of our life, then I think he has some things to say about that.
Yeah, I always want to be compelling to us as a church, and if you're just joining us as a listener, I want to be compelling to you. Each of us should leave no doubt that Jesus is of the greatest value. When they look at Desi, when they look at Philip, when they look at your life as the listener, they should have no doubt that you think Jesus is of the greatest value. In my life, where I put my priorities, the way I use my gifts and talents should leave no doubt. Jesus is worth everything. Yeah. And if it's not, then we've got to look at what needs to change.
Boy. So good. Man, so in this talk, what do you feel like is the one takeaway for the Armory section of the podcast?
My one takeaway is, are you and I and the listener willing to ask one question? And Jesus, is there anything that's causing me to have a price of walking away from you? And asking, and basically just being willing to ask. And then I'll just go and tell you flat out, this is a dangerous prayer. You need to understand, if you pray this, Jesus is going to talk back on this one. He's going to tell you, Holy Spirit's going to move. Jesus, is there anything that would cause me to walk away from you? And if there is, I'll give it up. And do not pray that unless you're willing to do it, because odds are there's something that you and I are holding on to or clinging to that we have high value on that needs to be let go. Yeah. That is competing with Jesus, and there should be no competition of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And basically it boils down to, are we willing to deny ourselves? Are you willing to deny yourself? Am I willing to deny myself and follow Jesus with everything we have?
Man. Heck yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us this week on the podcast. And we look forward to breaking down the next sermon next week.
We will. Shout out to Austin Watson behind the camera. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you enjoy it, hit the like button or subscribe. Share with some friends. We really appreciate it and love you guys for joining us.